Saudi Arabia pressured into providing more answers about the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. But is the global response tough enough to get those answers? What kind of political and economic interests are swaying the decision makers? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zaidan. Outrage, condemnation and diplomatic action escalating worldwide. The killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi continues to provoke reaction. He was last seen entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October the 2nd. Since then, the world has been gripped by accounts of what really happened. The mystery first unfolded through leaks by Turkish investigators. Reports emerged about a Saudi hit squad killing and dismembering the journalist, allegedly on the orders of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. After 2 weeks of Saudi denials, they eventually admitted Khashoggi was mistakenly killed during a brawl in the consulate. And they denied any involvement by the Crown Prince. Denials met with widespread scepticism. Turkey's president has confirmed what he called a savage, premeditated murder. Recep Tayyip Erdogan has called for an independent investigation that holds any Saudi accountable from top to bottom. And he's calling on the kingdom to provide answers, especially about who gave the order to murder Khashoggi and where his body remains are. Let's have a look at how world leaders have reacted so far. The message from the United States has changed significantly. The US is now adopting a more negative stance towards the kingdom. At first, Donald Trump said the Saudi explanation was credible. He stressed the importance of relations with his Saudi allies and said millions of American jobs were more important than imposing sanctions. Well, now the president says the Saudis are guilty of the worst cover-up ever. Germany has stopped Saudi weapons deals. Chancellor Angela Merkel has joined other European countries in calling for a credible investigation. The G7, which includes Japan, Canada and the US, condemned the killing in the strongest possible terms. France suspended all diplomatic visits to the kingdom. Other countries and business leaders boycotted a major investment conference in Riyadh. But leaders in the Arab world have varied from silence to welcoming the steps taken by the Saudis. Let's bring in our panel. Joining us in the show in Washington, D.C., we have Moin Rabbani, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Palestine Studies. In Istanbul, Sinan Ulgen, Chairman of the Center for Economic and Foreign Policy Studies, and also in Washington, D.C., Giorgio Cafiero, the CEO of Gulf State Analytics. Welcome to you all. If I could start with Moin, are human rights considerations starting, perhaps, Moin, to win over in calculations of self-interest now that we've seen, for example, the US is starting to take some initial measures like cancelling visas of people it believes may be linked to Khashoggi's killing?
I think it's a bit of a stretch to assume that the United States or some of these European governments have suddenly discovered the importance of human rights in the Middle East. I think what's really happened here is that the result of pressure and the constant leaks and so on have forced them into a corner and they have had to act. I mean, I think the operative principle for these governments is that they can't let the dismembered body of a Saudi journalist get in the way of more important things like selling arms to Riyadh to complete the obliteration of Yemen and to renew conflict with Iran and to consolidate Israeli occupation over Palestine and so on. But I think what's happened is that in this political context, they have felt compelled to take some measures. Whether they're going to be merely symbolic or more substantive is something we'll have to see over the long run. But, you know, there is a history here of 70 years of Western policy, one of whose operative principles is to prevent the peoples of the Middle East from controlling their own destiny. And I think if you were to ask anyone in the region whether they think Western, and particularly American policy, has been driven by any consideration of human rights, they're liable to die laughing and before they can answer your question.
Well, let me jump in here because we have been hearing some words along those lines from Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor. Let's listen into what she's been saying about her concern for human rights.
Was da in dem saudischen Konsulat passiert ist?
What happened to Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate is inconceivable. It reflects that human dignity isn't respected in many parts of the world. Some treaties are now being cancelled and reversed, which again prompts us to work more for world peace. We must find solutions. We must strive to preserve Europe together because it's a society based on shared values, and we must not lose sight of our gains. We must continue to fight for the permanence of 7 decades of peace.
In light of things like that, let me take that now to Sinan then. Are some world leaders, really shocked? Has this killing really shocked some world leaders into perhaps beginning to think about how we should all really value human rights, which seem to be diminishing?
It certainly has shocked. The nature of the crime in itself is very shocking, but also the fact that it took place within the compound of a diplomatic representation is also quite unprecedented. Now, we have seen the reactions globally as well as in Turkey to this crime. And I think the Turkish strategy here, which has been to also gradually share with international public opinion some of the evidence, has also allowed the nurturing of international pressure for Western governments to start to react more strongly. You have, indeed, for instance, the German Chancellor Merkel has reacted to this 2 days ago, declared that Germany was suspending arms delivery to Saudi Arabia. But it took more than 2 weeks for Germany to come to that stance. I think the same can be said with regard to the US administration, and even there, much less has happened in terms of the overall reaction for reasons that we know well, namely the relationship between the US President Trump and the Crown Prince. Mohammed bin Salman, but also the fact that with the Trump administration, the US had decided to invest much more heavily in its relationship with Saudi Arabia and form a nucleus of a group that would underpin the containment strategy towards Iran. So there are a host of reasons why the reaction is not being commensurate with the gravity of the crime and the upholding of human rights. But
we've seen a nuanced change in the US position over the last 2 or 3 weeks, right? Or at least the White House position.
Yes, but still no clear impact on the relationship with Saudi. So far, we have seen, occasional statements coming from the White House. Some negative, some less negative, but nothing so far.
Well, they said they've started to revoke visas. That's tangible, isn't it?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, they said they've started to revoke visas. That's tangible, isn't it?
Yes, but not in a way that would impact the power structure in Riyadh, is it?
Okay, let's bring Giorgio into the discussion. So do you think at all, Giorgio, that the Khashoggi killing might become a turning point in human rights accountability in Saudi Arabia?
I'm pretty skeptical right now. I think that for the Trump administration, this comes as a huge political headache right before the United States' midterm elections next month. Saudi Arabia is, of course, becoming a domestic issue in the United States right now, becoming a big liability for the Trump administration, especially with more in the media paying attention to the special relationship between Kushner and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. But to get to your question, we're seeing some rhetoric from the White House that might seem positive from the standpoint of those who want the kingdom to be held accountable. but I don't think there's going to be a real push from this administration on Saudi Arabia to change its positions on issues concerning human rights. I think more pressure will probably come from U.S. lawmakers. But how is this going to pan out on the ground in Saudi Arabia? How is it going to change the way in which the kingdom is being ruled today? I'm pretty skeptical about any major changes coming as a result of this very ugly case.
I'm glad you mentioned the Congress, though. We'll pick up on that point in a second. But let me take this thought back to Sinan briefly. Remind us what's at stake here in terms of standards of governance in this region as a whole, depending on how internationalized this Khashoggi affair in terms of accountability goes.
Well, I mean, this is really an affront. If you want to speak in more philosophical terms, this is an affront to human dignity. And therefore, there needs to be a strong reaction showing what the red lines of the international community is. And that's generally what's expected. However, can we really think that even if we were to see such a strong reaction from the international community, what would be the overall impact of this? Whether this incident could be glossed over and go back to business as usual in the foreseeable future, or whether we can expect to see some change in behavior, some real accountability. That remains an open question.
Okay, let me take this thought to Moeen. For the first time, we've had the US president indicating in an interview that the Saudi crown prince might be responsible for Khashoggi's killing. Why? What's toughened or changed his stance?
You know, when you're talking about President Trump, you're really talking about a volatile airhead who's kind of all over the map, and therefore I find it very difficult to take anything he says seriously, particularly because he tends to take every side of an issue in the space of a day and sometimes an hour. I think what's really at stake here is I believe that there is a solid U.S. and, for that matter, European consensus about the need to continue propping up the Saudi regime, as with other repressive regimes in the region. And I think the question people are asking themselves is whether this impulsive, reckless, volatile crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, serves that strategic objective, or rather forms an obstacle to it. And within the United States, for example, it's been pretty clear for some time that the professionals, if you will, in the State Department and in the CIA and in the defense establishment had their reservations about Mohammed bin Salman from the very outset. But what you had with the coming of the Trump administration is that Saudi-American relations have become almost a function of a personal relationship between the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And I think what we may be seeing now, at least here in the United States, is an attempt by the professionals to reclaim a role in that relationship. Now, this is complicated because in the meantime, Mohammed bin Salman has managed to establish absolute and unbridled power in Riyadh, has managed to weaken any alternative power centers, whether other branches of the family or the security forces and so on. And so I think this is going to go on for some time, and that even if, there is, basically I would say Mohammed bin Salman's future is now in the hands of the Trump administration.
Okay, that's an important point. Let me take that thought back to Giorgio. So if we're seeing the White House, Donald Trump, put something of a question mark over Mohammed bin Salman, what does that mean for the Crown Prince?
It seems that if more and more people in America come to the conclusion that MBS played some sort of a role in the murder of the Washington Post contributor, Crown Prince who may become the next king of Saudi Arabia, is going to be seen as increasingly toxic in Washington. Since he began his ascendancy to the palace, MBS and those around him have made major investments in the US and other Western countries, trying to attract foreign investment for his Vision 2030 reform agenda. He's tried to obtain a lot of goodwill in Washington. Those efforts now have suffered. The question is if the reversal is, if this can be reversed or not, this negative direction. It's going to be very,
Well, do you think
very
it can?
difficult for MBS to regain the goodwill. You know, in the past, there have been so many issues that cause tension between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia and between other countries in Saudi Arabia. But over time, those issues seem to sort of escape the spotlight, and relations always went back to business as usual. Surely the Saudis want that right now, but given how much outrage there is in Washington, I think it's going to be a long time before people stop talking about this case.
And perhaps also different this time is how many international players there are on this issue, not least of which, of course, Turkey. Sinan, do you think Turkey wants to see the accountability reach Mohammed bin Salman's doorstep at this point?
Surely, I tend to think that that's the Turkish president's objective. That is also the reason why there is pressure mounting on the Turkish side gradually. The reason why that is gradual is because President Erdogan is also aware of the difficulty that this incident has caused to the U.S. president, and just as the Turkey-U.S. relationship is slowly improving, Erdogan did not want to create yet another serious difficulty for Trump before the midterms. So this is the fine balancing act that he has to take into consideration. On the one hand, he wants to build up pressure so that eventually Mohammed bin Salman is held accountable. But at the same time, he also wants to provide a face-saving formula for Trump, given how deep that relationship is between Trump, Jared Kushner, and MBS.
I wonder, Moeen, if you think, listening to what Sinan's saying there, whether you think Donald Trump may already be finding that face-saving solution to allow perhaps harder measures against Saudi Arabia when he said he'll leave it mostly up to Congress to decide what to do next. Surely he knows full well that the sentiment in Congress amongst most senators, bipartisan, is to go for sanctions against Saudi Arabia.
Yes, but you can have sanctions that amount to a slap on the wrist, or you can have a meaningful change of policy.
Don't most senators want something more than a slap on the wrist at this point?
Well, that's what they're saying now. Give the lobbyists some time to spring into action, and they may end up being less enthusiastic. And also, what kind of sanctions are they proposing? For example, should the United States cease to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia? That would obviously be good news for Yemen, for example, but wouldn't necessarily affect the power dynamic in Riyadh. As with so many Arab regimes, the legitimacy of an Arab regime is not determined by the support of its own people. They can survive quite well without the support of their own people. The real test of their longevity is whether Western governments are prepared to continue propping them up. And that, I think, is the key issue here. And again, we're not talking about regime change in Riyadh. We're really talking about the future of one player in that power structure, and whether Mohammed bin Salman will be allowed to continue playing the role he has, monopolizing power the way he has, ascend to the throne and remain on that throne for perhaps decades. And given the type of decisions he's been taking, I think there are growing misgivings in the West about keeping him on board for perhaps decades to come. And there are second thoughts. Now, whether at this stage it's going to be a simple matter to have him replaced or not is, I think, an entirely different set of questions.
Georgia, what impact would any level of tough action from Congress have, do you think, on Riyadh?
I think that if the U.S. government is going to take actions against Saudi Arabia, what we can expect is an acceleration of a trend that began years and years ago, and that is the Saudi Arabians making a geo-economic shift eastward. What we're seeing from this current conference in Saudi Arabia that's ongoing right now is sort of a stepped-up presence of Russian, Chinese, and other Eastern investors in the kingdom. In many countries in the East, there's less of a political price for the leadership to pay if it's seen as being very close to a regime like Saudi's. And so I think Saudi Arabia is going to try to become more autonomous from the United States and Europe, and its eyes are going to be on Moscow and Beijing.
It relies heavily on the US for its defense mechanism and strategy, though, doesn't it, Sinan?
Yes, indeed. And I think just to follow on that thought, it was conspicuous in a way that so far the statements coming out of Moscow have been very neutral. We have not heard any, criticism from Moscow. It is, and Putin's statements were essentially quite cautious and protective of Riyadh's interest. So I think when we talk about the reaction to what happened among the international community, maybe we should be slightly more nuanced. The real reaction is from the West. We haven't really seen any strong reaction from other countries like Russia or China, and that ultimately may also be taken into consideration in the calculus in Riyadh.
Moin, how real is the scenario, do you think, of Saudi Arabia using perhaps its oil card to kind of mute any consideration of strong sanctions or actions against it?
I think it's extremely unlikely because what Saudi Arabia needs now more than anything is a strengthening of its relations with the West, and particularly with the Trump administration. Secondly, Saudi Arabia is very heavily invested in along with Israel and the Trump administration, in seeking to increase tensions and pursue a strategy of regime change in Iran. And so the last thing it will want to do is to take measures that will raise the price of oil above and beyond what the removal of Iranian oil from the market would cause. So I think it's extremely unlikely. And also, bear in mind the context. Saudi Arabia is now under significant reputational pressure, if you will. And if it responds to this by playing the oil card and, trying to wreak havoc in energy markets and so on, that's going to reflect very negatively on them, and particularly on the individual who everyone sees as effectively functioning as a sole decision maker in Riyadh these days. All right,
I think we are going to have to end the discussion there because we're running out of time. It's been a good discussion. Let's thank our guests, though. Giorgio Cafiero, Sinan Ulgan, and Moin Rabbani. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zaidan, and the whole team here for now, thanks for joining us.